Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The session will begin in 1 minute.
I am APAP.
I am APAP.
I am APAP.
I am APAP.
Association of Performing Arts
Professionals.
I am APAP.
I am APAP.
I am APAP.
Presenters.
Producers.
Performers.
Promoters
Prototypers.
Provocateurs.
Peer Support Possibilities
I am APAP.
I am APAP.
I am APAP.
Artists
Educators,
Mentors.
Board member.
agents,
Risk takers.
Managers.
Students
Colleagues.
partners.
Community
Family.
I am APAP.
I am APAP.
I am APAP.
我来自 APAP.
Je suis APAP.
Yo sono APAP.
Ich bin APAP.
私は APAP です
Soy APAP.
We are APAP.
We are APAP.
Please welcome to the stage Ann Carlson.
Check, is my mic, oh, there we go. Is it really only the second Sunday of 2018? My name is Ann Carlson. I work in the field of dance and performance. The Symphonic Body Project is a performance made entirely of gestures. It is a movement-based orchestral work. Instead of instruments, the individuals in this orchestra perform gestural portraits based on the motions of their workday. I spent the last 4 weeks visiting, knocking on their doors, inviting them to rehearse, learning about their workdays, of the individuals, the community of workers, the orchestral body that is seated behind me. These are the people that make this conference happen. And these are the people also that maintain and expand and evolve the infrastructure that is APAP. So behind me are the board of directors of APAP, the executive director of APAP, the staff members of APAP, the artist members, how many times can we say APAP? And the leader in the fellowship program in APAP. And we also welcome to the stage 3 members of the staff of the Creative Capital Foundation. The Symphonic Body is honored to be a Creative Capital project. I think of the Symphonic Body as a social sculpture, as a jazz improvisation, as a window into the breadth and timing and attention and nuance and passion that animates our community in any given moment. Thank you all for saying yes. Thank you for saying yes and being here and accepting the invitation to reperform ourselves, for accepting the invitation to take up residence in our bodies more deliberately, and for becoming increasingly conscious of the minute and grand and goofy and glorious gestures that make up the dance, the life, the dance, our lives, dance, life of the everyday. So this is a special version of the symphonic body, about a 9-minute version. The symphonic body, APAP. Thing, I need the mic again. I'm going to do the gesture like this, and that is their cue. They know that already. But I thought you might join us to pay homage to those that came before and those that will come before, and the people whose shoulders we're standing on and the land that we're standing on. To pay homage to I think, the artists who this work is standing on. John Cage, Trisha Brown, Audre Lorde, Joseph Beuys, to name just 4. But perhaps you would like to join and consider your own ancestors or your own, the people in your life that inspire you.
I wish. I wish. I wish.
I don't approach.
I wish. I wish. I wish. I wish.
Jumbo.
I wish.
I don't approach.
I wish. I wish. I wish.
I don't approach. Jumbo.
I wish. I wish. I wish. I wish.
I don't approach.
I wish. I wish.
Wednesday. Well, let me tell you. All in favor? Aye. I don't approach. Jumbo.
I wish. I wish. I wish.
I don't approach. Jumbo.
I wish. I wish. I wish. I wish.
Jumbo.
I wish. I wish.
Jumbo.
I wish.
I don't approach.
I wish.
Jumbo.
I wish. I wish. I wish.
I don't approach. Jumbo.
I wish. 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 wish. I wish. I wish. I wish. I wish. I wish. I wish. Wednesday. I wish. Yes. 9. I wish. 9. I wish. Wednesday. 9. I wish. Yes. 1. I don't approach. I wish.
Thank you.
Please welcome our conference co-chair, Kevin Spencer.
Wow. What a great way to get started this morning. Thank you, Anne. Another nice round of applause for the symphonic body performers. What an absolutely cool way to get started. That was a surprise for me. I knew there was going to be a surprise. I didn't know what it was going to be. That was really spectacular. And what a meaningful way to remind us of what our community is, what APAP is, and our new name, the Association of Performing Arts Professionals. I think it's also a really meaningful reminder that while all of us come from very different facets of our industry, we are one body, one community of people. So thank you so much for being here this morning for our Sunday plenary. We appreciate you all look very rested after such a full day of activities yesterday. So either you slept very, very well, or you're coming in here with a double shot of espresso. One of the two. I'm not really sure which one that is. We also want to thank all of those who are watching, our colleagues who are watching through Facebook Live, courtesy of our friends at Culture Hub. I also want to take an opportunity to thank this morning's sponsor, the City of New York Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment. And here to welcome you personally to this morning's session is my friend and the Theater Director of the Strategic Partnerships for the Mayor's Office, Carla Hoke-Miller.
Okay. Kevin's supposed to tap dance behind me. That was the plan. Hi, everyone. That was a magnificent performance, truly. And, you know, they say there is drama in the workplace, but this is the best example of it I've ever seen. So I'm just going to briefly welcome everyone and thank you so much for being here. And this is the third year that the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment has been a part of the APAP family, sponsoring this panel. And we're thrilled and really look forward to hearing a subject near and dear to our hearts of, you know, sustaining, demonstrating, working to figure out this, the crazy politics of our lives and how to best portray them. And so this is also the first year that we have done a concerted promotional campaign, been a promotional supporter of the Jan Arts NYC Alliance of 11 partnering festivals that happened during January, which is now my favorite month. and even though it's freezing cold. And so we worked very closely with so many of you, and just to name a few names of people that have been instrumental in the partnership that we've created to really get out there the work that so many do. It's our office's mission to make sure that all levels of theater and all the industries that support it and all the services and the institutions get the light shined on them, and we're trying to help in any way we can. So we're open to any suggestions. We're doing we've just put out a request for proposals through the Economic Development Corporation to study small venue theater industry as a whole, anywhere from some of the larger commercial off-Broadway theaters all the way down to site-specific work and individual producers. And I'll have more on that later. The report's probably going to be out about a year from now. So I want to thank Kevin and Mario and Jenny Thomas, who I work with so closely, and Megan Redmond, Krista Bradley, and Vicki Abrash for doing this amazing programming throughout, and this plenary especially. So, one of the things that we're really working to do, and something that came out of the Create NYC report, is for our agency, which we do actually partner with a lot of other agencies, including the People with Disabilities, Immigration, Veterans Affairs. We're doing initiatives for women in every, kind of way throughout. And our office, although we do represent theater, and that's my part of it, we also represent film, broadcasting, music now as of this year. And June is Music Month, is a big deal for us. So anybody that's doing programming during June, give me a call and I'll put you in touch with the right people. You can get on our website at nyc.gov/MOME, M-O-M-E. And so that's about it, and thank you for being here. Thank you for having me. Bye.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you, Carla, and thanks again for your support for this session. We really appreciate it. So yesterday's plenary focused on the transdisciplinary nature of the arts, and that was absolutely fantastic. This morning, we are going to celebrate artists as activists. I am especially excited about the session this morning because we get to explore this topic in what we hope will be a very dynamic discussion in this town hall format. Here to lead us in this session and to introduce our artist activist panel is a veteran arts manager and executive, Carol McCord. Carol is the president of the Equity Quotient, a national training and organizational development firm dedicated to supporting nonprofits interested in becoming more just and equitable as community partners with equity, diversity, and inclusion as their outcomes. So please, welcome to the stage our moderator today, Carol McCord.
Good morning, APAP. I am APAP. Are we warm enough? So I'm so excited to do moderate this session this morning. And before I begin any of this work, I always want to acknowledge the land of the indigenous people who once walked this place. I just do this as a part of my practice. So artists as activists. Here was a question that was put to Luis Valdez one day. Is theater worth dying for? And this question was put to him by a highway patrolman who had a gun in his head. Luis was working with Cesar Chavez in the 1960s, organizing migrant workers who were organizing for better working conditions, who were organizing for better wages, who were organizing to have their kids educated. And it was upsetting the status quo. He wasn't stopped by accident. They knew who he was. And this highway patrolman puts a gun on him and asks him, is theater worth dying for? And Luis said in that moment he had to ask himself, what's important in my life? And he also understood that what I'm doing must be important because an officer of the state has a gun on me, and I'm making theater. In 2011, Alternate Roots, the organization that I worked with for 9 years, Alternate Roots, for its 35th anniversary celebration, had a festival called Roots Fest in West Baltimore, atop a highway called the Highway to Nowhere. And it was in a part of the community that people ordinarily would not go into, and that's where we did our festival. And we brought Mr. Valdez to Baltimore and had a conversation with he and John O'Neill. John O'Neill was the founder of the Free Southern Theater. And we called this session When Theater Was Dangerous. The Free Southern Theater came out of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee's activities in Mississippi in the early 1960s. They used theater as a means of telling stories, of gathering the stories of poor people, of black people in Mississippi who were trying to register to vote. And John and these two giants sitting there sharing their stories about a time when theater was indeed dangerous. And John told the story about coming out for a performance one night, he and Gilbert Moses, and looked out into the audience, and there were highway patrolmen and state police and local police with guns in their laps, waiting to see what these men were going to say. Those are the roots of this thing that we call arts and activism. Paul Robeson put his career on the line. It goes back way before any of us can think of at this moment. In 1989, I was a member of a delegation of theater artists in Russia. With the League of Chicago Theaters, 11 theater members from Chicago, 2 members from the Bay Area, and I happened to be one of the 2 from the Bay Area. We spent 15 days in 1989 as Perestroika and Glasnost was happening. And every theater that we talked with, as the censorship was ending, here's what the theater artists said to us. Now what is our role? What is our role now when censorship is ending in communist Russia? Because we were the place that people came to learn what was happening. They were telling the stories to people who were oppressed by the communist regime. So when we talk about arts and activism, the roots of this thing are deep. And I can tell you that it's never more important than where we are right now. Because never in my almost 70 years have we come as close to what I have seen and what I experienced growing up in the United States in the 1950s. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists for this morning, and I'm delighted to be joined by Ping Chang, Sean Dorsey, Lauren Ruffin, and Tanya Silverednam. So, I almost feel like, I'm sure everybody here knows you, but just in case they don't, I'm going to allow you to introduce yourself. Give you a chance to tell us who you are, what you're doing. Ping.
Good morning, everyone. Ping Chang Company is an interdisciplinary performing arts organization with multiple artists and teaching artists of different generations. Our work primarily addresses issues of belonging and otherness in the world. We work internationally and nationally in theaters, universities, high schools, community centers, corporate headquarters, and other social spaces. For the last 25 years, we have created theatrical spaces and structures so that marginalized communities could be heard, including young Muslims, Congolese refugees, transgender people, and at the New Victory Theater right now, marginalized youth. And we don't use actors, they speak for themselves. Parallel to this, I have created interdisciplinary works that disrupt societal myths and lies by excavating hidden, suppressed, or little-known histories of injustice nationally and internationally.
Thank you.
Did I do that in a minute?
You did that in a minute.
Okay.
Sean, good morning. Good morning. So I arrive in the room as a dance maker and writer and dance educator and longtime transgender and queer community organizer and activist. And I also arrive in the room in the middle of touring two major transformative projects. The first is The Missing Generation, which gives voice to transgender and LGBT longtime survivors of the early part of the AIDS epidemic. And to create this work, I spent a year traveling the country and recorded 75 hours of oral history interviews with trans and queer survivors. And as we tour the work, we bring together communities, intergenerational forums, bringing youth and elders together to talk about HIV and AIDS, workshops and classes that support trans folks in dance. If you live in New York, you can come see us being presented at the Joyce this June. And the new work that I am working on right now that will premiere this spring before starting its 2-year 20-city tour is Boys in Trouble, which is unpacking American masculinity with unflinching honesty and uncompromising, unapologetic trans and queer perspectives. And like all my work, I'm creating and performing and touring it with, for, and by community, so also conducting forums and workshops and classes as we tour the work. And I'm so honored to be part of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. And Lauren.
I brought a video so I wouldn't mess this up. So Artist Campaign School, this is our first cohort, fall 2017. We brought together 31 artists to provide them with the education, the tools, and the resources they need to run for a political office.
We talked about how to utilize message, we talked about how to spend money. It is always such a tremendous issue for campaigns.
I am here because I'm an artist that is tired of rhetoric.
I think artists come to problems with unique and creative ways of solving it, and our government definitely needs some creative thinking right now.
And Tanya.
So I do a lot of different things, but my first love is theater, which is why I'm here. And I've worked with companies like the Wooster Group and the Builders Association, and most recently with Carrie Mae Weems on Grace Notes at the Kennedy Center and The Shape of Things at the Armory. I also produce films, which is how I support my love for theater, and most recently for Glamour magazine Women of the Year and Planned Parenthood coming up. Right now, top of plate is the Federation, which is a loose coalition of artists, organizations, and allies committed to keeping cultural borders open. My co-founders are Laurie Anderson and the producer Laura Mickelshishin. And coming up, we have Art Action Day, which is next Saturday, January 20th. We want artists and their audiences to be louder and more visible than ever on this first anniversary of the inauguration. There's stuff happening all over the country. If you go to wearethefederation.org, you'll find some of it. If you're in New York, we have a big rally on the steps of the New York Public Library with artists from vulnerable communities and a sing-along at the Public Theater, and then dancing with an all-women mariachi band at the Brooklyn Academy of Music that night. Our slogan is "Art is essential to democracy," and our hashtags are "Art unites us" and "Culture keeps borders open."
Thanks. Thank you.
ASL is not on the line.
I can't hear you.
The ASL, I notice, is not on the screen.
Alicia, stage managers. Something is not on, the ASL is not on, is that what it is?
Just on the, yeah, it should be on this.
Okay, they'll fix it. Thank you. So, stories. We're not hearing enough stories today. We don't know how to talk to each other. And the most essential thing that we have are our stories. How do we get to know each other? When we talk about arts and activism, in my own work with Equity Quotient, I use story circles a lot because it's a way of breaking down barriers. It's a way of getting people to get out of our heads. It's a way for us to get a natural human connection. And the story circle method that John O'Neill codified from the Free Southern Theater is something that a practice that I really, really learned at Alternate Roots and have been using a lot. How many people in this room have ever been to an Alternate Roots annual meeting? All right, Rooters in the house. So when we were putting this session together, when I asked to moderate this, I said, you know, I want to give the people in the audience, an opportunity not just to hear talking heads, but to understand who we are and why we do this work. And I wanted people to also to have a tool that you can take back into your own work. Understand that these story circles, this methodology was used to create theater. John O'Neill and the Free Southern Theater lasted for 25, 30 years, and then he founded Junebug Productions. Luis Valdez and El Teatro Campesino was still going in San Juan Bautista. It's a way of making authentic work, genuine work, work with integrity with communities. And so we're going to use the story circle method this morning for our group to begin to share a little bit about not just the work that we're doing, but who we are. So let me quickly, this is a very abbreviated guidelines for the story circles. And we're violating the very first rule. We're not sitting in a circle. Just wouldn't work in this format. But normally, you would sit in a circle. And the circle is as big as the circle needs to be, best around 5 to 6 people. And the prompts are I've got a prompt that I'm going to give to our participants and we'll begin talking, but here are the rules. 1, listen deeply. 2, try not to think about what you're trying to say, what your story is, as you're listening to the other person. There has never been a time that I've been in a story circle that if I just stop and listen, I hear something from somebody's story that makes me say, oh, this is the story that I need to tell. 3, it has to be your story, not somebody else's story. It's not my opinion, oh, I thought. 4, Ping and I have had he's telling a story about an experience where I was there. I cannot interrupt him and say, Ping, I don't remember that. That's not how that story went. It's his story. 5, we listen deeply, no talking, no answering questions, we're just there to share. And then once we're done, oh, I forgot another rule, which we're going to violate today. Another rule, everybody in the circle has to share. You get to pass once, but it will come around. What goes around comes around. In story circles, it will come back to you because everybody in the circle has to share. But we're already set up to share, so nobody is going to pass this morning. And then once the stories, everybody's had a chance to speak 3 to 5 minutes normally. You then do crosstalk, and what are some of the common things that we've heard? What are some of the common themes that we heard? Are there things that resonated deeply? And then we would choose a story or a couple of themes, and we would then share that with the audience. So we're going to do some of that this morning, and then once that's done, we're going to open it up to the floor, to the house. And I hope that we'll have lots of questions because we'll have runners who will be handing people the mics, handing mics out, and then you get to ask questions. Maybe share your stories, because here's the other thing that we think is really important. There are probably 10, 20 people, 30 people sitting out there in the audience who are doing work who could also be up here. We're not assuming that everybody in the house is not doing this work. We just happen to be the ones who are here today. Okay? All right, so our story circle prompt. The story circle prompt is to tell a story about a time that something happened that spurred you to be an artist, as an artist to be an activist, or as an activist to work in the arts. And something about what you're doing now that arises from that. And I'm going to go first to model. And I've got 5 minutes, so I'm going to do this, I'm trying to do it in less than 5. And this is a story that I still tell it because it still resonates and it's still important. In 1987, I was managing director of Oakland Ensemble Theater, a 500-seat equity theater in downtown Oakland. It was a black theater. We did amazing work. We had a board. We did everything that they told us we were supposed to do to have as a resident theater. The board, marketing director, staff, space, production manager, et cetera, et cetera. Ford Foundation at that time was starting to fund theater. And the program officer for the Ford Foundation came to meet with us. She saw our work, and then she took my producing director and I out to dinner. Lovely dinner, you know, hardworking artists in 1987. We couldn't afford this kind of dinner. So we went, yeah, great, thank you. And she takes us to dinner and she tells us how great she thought the work was and how surprised she was at the production values, et cetera. And then she says, but I'm not going to ask you to submit an application to Ford. And we said, why? And she said, because I'm not convinced that there's a need for Black, Latino, or Asian theater companies. I think that the mainstream theaters can do the work and they could do it well. And we were stunned and undone. I was, you know, and I still get this quivering in my belly as I tell this. Because as we said to her, it's not just about the playwrights, it's not just about the stories, but it's also about the communities that we serve. So the same thing happened when she met with Asian American Theater Company in San Francisco and Lorraine Hansberry Theater in San Francisco. And that began this policy of funding major institutions to do the work of Black, Latino, and Asian theaters. Fast forward to 2000, I think it was April of 2016, and I was representing Alternate Roots at a meeting at the National Endowment for the Arts. And it was a meeting called for service organizations, national service organizations, about equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I'm sitting at a table with my 6 colleagues from different organizations, and we're asked the question, why are your boards having problems with diversity? And one of the organizations, the National Association for Music Education, said, well, my board is not diverse. I can't diversify my board. And we asked him why, and he said, because my board is, unlike most boards, my board members are elected from the membership. They're not selected. And so we said, well, why don't you diversify your membership? And his response was, well, we can't diversify our membership because Blacks and Latinos lack the keyboard skills needed for this field. And they have, you know, there's also competency needed for music theory. So this is 2015. So I went to Alternate Roots, I went back to my organization, and I said, I need to write about this because it kept me up all night. And I wrote a letter, why we need diversity, equity, and inclusion in the arts. And 45,000 shares later, the piece went viral. And I asked the essential question, does the views of this executive director represent your organization, or are they his views? Because if they're his views and he's representing the organization, you need to know that. And if it's organization's views, the field needs to know that. And so that's how I have always had to challenge the status quo. And it's the reason today that I've started Equity Quotient to help organizations really understand what these issues are. And that's my story.
Alphabetical order?
Yes.
It's such a loaded question, and the first thing I thought of was how, as a person of color in the United States, I will always be a second-class citizen, and I know this. And I also wanted to say that many years ago, I was living in upstate New York. I had a small cottage in upstate New York. I had this cottage for 10 years or so, and I was at a neighbor's. I sold the place, and I was at a neighbor's in a bonfire in a lovely field at night with the stars over us. And I said, I've lived in this. I've had this little house in this little hamlet in upstate New York which doesn't even have a general store. And I've never had any experiences of racial prejudice up here. I had a friend staying at my house visiting from the city, and the next morning he said, "This was on your doorstep." And it was a white supremacist racial notice, which said basically, you know, brown, Jews, blacks, mud people. And I said, well, I've been here 10 years, and this is my going away present. So it's hard for me to say specifically one thing, because our experiences of people of color's experiences in this country is so dense with these micro and larger experiences that it's difficult to name one thing. I will talk about being invited to the Spoleto Festival in Charleston, South Carolina, and I was invited to specifically address the silence of race history in Charleston, because in Charleston all the monuments are to the Confederacy. And there's a little plaque on the island where 70% of the slaves came to the United States, which was only put up in the 90s, early 90s. And that plaque was a plaque that if you blinked, you wouldn't have seen, because it was not a gigantic statue of some white supremacist. When I worked on this project, my collaborator was my wonderful friend, colleague of many years, and collaborator, Talvin Wilkes, who many of you may know here. My lighting designer was an African-American lighting designer as well. And we would walk into a restaurant together, and there would always be these looks, like, what's this? You know. And one day, Darren McCroom, my lighting designer, and I walking down the street in Charleston, and a white student with a College of Charleston t-shirt on him. It was a narrow street, but the sidewalks were very narrow, and we were on the sidewalk. He stepped down past us, and even as he was coming, I was talking to Darren, and I didn't think I was just talking to Darren, but at the same time, my other radar, as all colored people have, noticed this guy. And he passes us, and he spits. And Darren said, "You know what that means?" I said, "No." And he said, "That means the N-word." So this is one, and then also because the Spoleto Festival is this big glitzy festival where every premiere you were at some wealthy person's mansion having canapes, you know, deviled crab and all this stuff. I said, our performance, which was having people who grew up in the Low Country, both black, white, and otherwise, that performance had to have lower price tickets for the community to be able to come see this performance. And I did not stay for the whole run of the show, but Talvin told me that at one of the talkbacks, one of the cast members was from Mississippi, and what was interesting about her was she was from a super racist part of the country, and yet her father was not. Her father was a white man who was not racist, and that fascinated me, and I included her in the show. But the other side of it was that she happened to have married, had kids, and then came out as a gay woman, and she came out as a gay woman during our show and told her mother during the time of our show. And at a talkback, a very Republican-looking patriarchal guy gets up and says, "You know, I don't like gay people, but after hearing what she went through, I have to think about this again." And that is, as someone who works in the field of art and activism, that was a deeply satisfying moment. So that's just one experience that I can share with you.
Thank you.
Sean. My story begins, like probably many folks in this room, my relationship with dance began in my living room, and probably like pretty large number of folks in the room also. My relationship with dance began in my living room, dancing to vinyl, which I know ages me slightly, probably. But my relationship to dance started in my living room, and maybe like a more indeterminate number of folks in the room, I started dancing in my living room in my pink leotard as a girl, and danced to my favorite vinyl records, chronologically speaking, which were Sesame Street Fever, followed by Fame, followed by the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And if you follow this progression, you know a lot about me already, okay? So what's also helpful to know is that I grew up in a super political, progressive family. And then you add into the mix the fact that I loved writing and storytelling and theater as a child, and that's where I feel like my own story really started to fly. So I loved dance with every single fiber in my body as a young person, but I did not grow up at the ballet bar. I did not grow up doing any formal dance training of any kind. And it was only until I was a grown-up that I get now that the reason I didn't grow up taking classes or dancing, doing any formal training, was because I didn't see a single person like me in the entire field of dance. I didn't see a single transgender person anywhere in the entire field of modern dance and contemporary dance. So I think it makes sense, those of us, many of us, this is true, that we can't even imagine how it could be possible we could do this. So when I thought about today, I thought about what does it mean in our story when we don't see ourselves or our body stories reflected in art, right? So two things happen for me and happen for us when we don't see trans people reflected in dance. The first thing that happened was that I couldn't imagine that I could ever do this, that I could ever be a professional dancer, let alone a dance maker, let alone tour and share my work, be presented in 29 cities across the country was unthinkable. And what also happened during this story was that the rest of the world, cisgender people, non-transgender people, also couldn't imagine that I could do this, right? So the absence of trans bodies in the arts impact all of us, not just trans people. So as I grew up, my primary identity was absolutely as an activist, right? I felt a deep calling and excitement and passion for social justice and being a part of transformative justice and making change. And so I thought I knew what that looked like. So that was like what we might call traditional activism, right? So like I had 2 calendars to keep track of all my coalition meetings and going to rallies and marches and, right, blocking intersections. And I never even imagined that my path and my story could include dance and the arts, because that, for me, although I love dance with every fiber of my body, that was selfish, right? Like this was how I was going to forge change, was through the traditional activist route. That would be just giving into a selfish love of mine. And it was not until I was almost 25 that I sat down one day with my journal, and I remember I was sitting on my bed in my bedroom and I was flipping through my journal, and I realized that every single image, every postcard, every newspaper clipping, every drawing in my entire journal was of a dancing body or dance or a dance review. And I will never forget that moment when I asked myself, you know, God willing, if I live a long life, am I going to look back and regret not like giving myself over a little bit to this part of my heart and my spirit? So I started taking community level dance classes. I learned what a tendu was at the age of 25 years old, right? I was playing catch up and at the same time encountering really painful, traumatic stuff around dealing with bathrooms and changing rooms and closing the door and crying before I went into class and dealing with gendered choreography and costuming and you name it. So as I'm learning what a tendu was, my ballet teacher at this community level class one day said, "Stay after class, I want to talk to you." And she said, "I think you have what it takes to become a professional dancer," which just like blew open my mind and cracked open my heart because I had never imagined this was possible for someone like me. So at the time I was doing a graduate program in community economic development, and so I auditioned for some dance programs. I took a year off to go to dance school. And so fast forward past a lot of uncomfortable stuff around being trans in those gendered spaces, I started making work. And right away, as a young, dance school, eager beaver student, I wanted to make work that used text and story and queerness and transness. And so I made my first piece of student work, and the whole dance community came out for these student recitals, right? And so I had all these cisgender choreographers and dancers being like, I'm really excited about your young voice. You're a gorgeous dancer, and I'm really interested in what you have to say. And so I got back to school the next day, and the director of the school called me into her office and said, sit down. And she said to me, last night, your work made people uncomfortable. And my mind and my heart shifted and thudded and sunk to the bottom of my gut, right? And all the stuff I had been through already as a coming to dance late trans person was all in my body again, right? And in that moment, I thought, I have found my calling. This is how I'm going to make a difference in the world. This is the activism I need to do, because the folks in the audience weren't uncomfortable. She was uncomfortable with me, right? So, and as I like to say, discomfort is the sound of things shifting. That's what we say in my new show, Boys in Trouble, available for touring through 2020. Discomfort is the sound of things shifting. So fast forward past many stories and years, moving to San Francisco and making work today, all of these stories of how I got onto this stage and this chair are embedded in my body, and I feel like I know that I make award-winning, gorgeous, luscious, precise, technical dances that are rooted and steeped in story and truth, not in spite of being a trans person in a trans body, but precisely because I am a trans person in a trans body. So that's my story.
Lauren. So I come from a long line of advocates. I kind of push back against the activist thing because everyone in my family, everyone in my life tends to do really, really deep and transformational work. And it lasts for a long time and it really changes people's lives. And I was always really reluctant to be into that. When I was growing up, my father had 130 foster kids. They lived in our home. And I always felt, which you rarely hear people of color say this, I always felt tremendous privilege comparatively, because I would live and grow up with these children who, for a variety of reasons, weren't able to be with their families. And my father would talk about the systemic policies that made that happen. So I grew up in Jersey, and when my father first started doing work in foster care and in group homes in the 70s, the kids who were in group homes were primarily white. And through a series of sort of criminalization of poverty, the criminalization of drugs, the war on drugs and drug abuse being a crime, black communities, which had primarily always been into kinship care, which means you have someone in the neighborhood who sees a family that maybe has too many kids or someone's not taking care of their kids, and that family would just adopt this kid. I have an Uncle Butch, he's like 70. I was 30 before I knew that he actually was a kid who grew up, who was living with his mother across the street, and she had him sleeping in a flower pot. And my Aunt Jean just went over and said, hey, can I watch your baby for a while, and never gave him back. He was like one of 13 kids. And the mother would come by and check on him, and they were very, very good friends, and I don't think they ever spoke, and I definitely didn't know that he wasn't actually a blood relative of mine until I was in my 30s. And so that's how it is in communities of color. We've always been really great at taking care of our own in the face of a government that wants nothing but to break up our families. So I lived in a house with all these crazy kids. My mother died when I was 8. And then when I was in my teens, some of my favorite memories of us all sitting around telling yo mama jokes. And nobody in the room had a mom. And the irony of that was not lost on me. Or your mama's so fat, and it's but none of us are with our moms. We haven't seen them in forever. I go off to college, and in the back of my mind, there's always this thought about these policies and these kids that are still in and out of my life, still calling me now today. And I go to college, and I'm like, I'm not going to do this service thing. I'm going to go get a law degree. I'm going to work for Shell Oil.
I'm gonna make a ton of money. So I have the great fortune to come out of law school in 2007 during a recession, which was, I've done a great job with graduating. It's actually maybe when I finish something, that's when the economy tanks, so I'm not going back to school. And I found myself like unable to get a job with Shell Oil and unable to get a job with a big firm. And so I go to work in this little boutique lobbying firm. Black owned, was working for former Congressman Bill Gray, Philadelphia, was the first black majority whip of the House, was the highest ranking black person ever before my president, Barack Obama. I did a lot of like lobbying stuff that was interesting, did some telecom work, but the stuff I really loved was the service stuff. It was working with Congressional Black Caucus to get scholarships for, kids from, black and brown kids who just wanted to come onto the Hill, but they couldn't afford an unpaid internship. It was getting government dollars for, Benedict College, which is in rural South Carolina, and they needed a nursing program. And so I'm out from the Hill, begging people for dollars so this rural community can have enough nurses because there's a huge nursing shortage in that community. So doing that work. Fast forward again, I'm out of a job because we've done away with earmarks. The bridge to nowhere kind of killed my lobbying career. And I thought, well, what do I know how to do? And I said, I know how to ask for money. And my dad says, like, I came out of the womb with my hand out, like hand first, just like, give it to me, just give it to me. And so I start working in DC, and I did some ed reform worked for the largest human services agency doing homeless services and food pantries. It's the largest residential treatment home for juvenile delinquents, so a big old foster care system, big old group home. So I'm like, God, I'm like back here following my father's footsteps. And I do a couple of capital campaigns, and I was burnt out. And I was like, I'm really not doing this like human services thing. I'm not doing this. I want to go and I want to be with people who are just like living their best lives, and I want this, like maybe I'll go back corporate. I get a call from Fractured Atlas. And I'm like, great, the arts. There are no poor people in the arts. This is going to be amazing. And I'm a month in, and I'm at a foundation meeting, and they're talking about wellness. And it's an all-day meeting. And I'm looking at the data that they did, which was primarily married white women, right? 3,000 people, most of them married white women. I'm like, God, this looks so familiar to me. Like, these people are like not doing well, which means all the brown people are like legit dying in this field. So this is terrible. And I'm like, God, I'm back here, and I'm going to get sucked into this service thing again. And I did. And Carol and I had a number of conversations, and she knows, like, she's part of the reason why I'm still doing this work. It's all your fault. And then the election happened, and I won't say his name because I don't want to curse in front of an audience this large, because I'm prone to cursing. And I realized that there's a need, and one of the things that I always loved about working with, but in that meeting, we spent all day, and it was like after lunch, and no one had said the word poverty or like poor. It was all like starving artists, and it was this acceptance thing. And I'm like, oh, like these folks don't know that like there's an entire group of people who are brown, who are living, who make as much money, or maybe some of them more money than you, and they're collecting food stamps, taking advantage of government programs. When we worked at homeless shelters, they went out and advocated. Like we had some homeless women who had been in family shelter in DC run for office. They most certainly showed up at the hearings about their services in droves and advocated for themselves. And I got the sense in this field that type of advocacy on your own behalf was, if you weren't doing it out in the streets, if it wasn't protest art, it was somehow kind of beneath folks. And maybe I'm wrong. But I think that artists have, and what I see in this field, the ability to tell stories, the ability to change perception is an incredible talent that we're seeing folks in politics do for all of the wrong reasons. And so I'm fortunate enough to work with an organization that said, training artists to run for office is actually a great idea, and it's really timely. And it's been very interesting to do that over the last year and to hear well-informed folks who are already doing deep-end work in the community. Once they're asked the question, have you ever thought of running for office, they decide they're going to run for office. And I think that's sort of where the change is. I think my change has always been or the way I've been an activist has always been deep-end services that happen over a long period of time. And I'll leave you with a quote that I found. I almost got in trouble for having my phone out before I came up here, but I brought it because there's this quote that, and then I lost it. Hold on, give me 1 second. And it relates to the Democratic sweep in Virginia. And it says, but Democrats should have learned more than they have from November's stunning electoral successes in Virginia. The lesson should have been that extraordinary and unknown candidates, including inspired and inspiring first-timers, could win elections without fame or fanfare. And I think that's what Artist Campaign School, it's about giving people the training and the tools they need to be able to go back into their communities to win elections, even though they're not a celebrity. We don't need any more celebrities. We need regular people who are already doing work in their communities to run for office. So, thank you.
Tanya.
First, I am inspired and humbled by everybody's stories. And I'm going to focus less on myself and more on the we, because one of the reasons that I got involved with theater was that it helped me come out of my shell and find a community and be with other misfits. And my father, his favorite writer was James Baldwin. And so I grew up around those books. And there's a quote by James Baldwin that I come back to very often in these terrifying but also exciting times, which is the precise role of the artist is to make the world a more human dwelling place. I have always been a big believer in the power of art to bring people together and the power of bringing people together who might otherwise not meet, but are working towards similar goals. I was first sparked to be an activist in the mid-'80s when I was a teenager and getting involved with the anti-apartheid movement. That was a deeply formative time for me. And I served on the divestment committee of my high school. And then when I was in college, I got very involved with the women's movement and became a youth organizer with the steering committee of the Women's Conference in China. And that, to me, was a life-changing experience, to have women from all over the world coming together in what was the last and largest gathering of women internationally. And I was producing youth arts and culture there. And for me, we just had fun, because it was just a bunch of kids, like, making art and showing people that we could come together through this art. Last year, I was producing a lot of election-related content, not because I wanted to work on a campaign. I don't like politics. I think it's dirty. But I was terrified by the prospect of what could happen under the current president. And that was sparked because I come from Sri Lanka, which had for many, many, many years the South Asian, I will say his name, and you can curse for me, the South Asian Donald Trump. And I saw there in my birth country how quickly things could go very badly. It soon became one of the most dangerous places in the world for journalists. People were scared to say what they thought, even in their own homes. And for me, you were talking about Luis Valdez and is theater worth dying for? I feel like free expression is worth dying for. And so I put together a core of artists from all over the country to generate content. Some of it was overtly released by the Hillary campaign, a poem by Eileen Miles, video by Carrie Mae Weems, but a lot more of it was done stealthily. And I thought, like so many people, that the day after the election, prior to the election, that I would be kind of sailing off into the sunset and I could stop organizing all this political work. But I realized very quickly that I had to keep doing it. And so one of the things that I'm focusing on now is the Federation. And the way that started was I was having I was with Lori Anderson and Laura Mikkelshishin, and Lori had recently returned from Germany, and she was talking about the increasing refugee crisis there and the increasing nationalism that was accompanying it. And it was back in March that we got together and were talking about this, and it was before the harmful tactics of this administration had taken effect, such as the travel ban. And Lori said, what can we do? And so we decided to bring people together that we know, that we admire, that could take big ideas and make them happen and talk about it. And in that first gathering, everybody went around the room and talked about something that they were doing to keep cultural borders open, or an idea that they had. And as more and more people talked, you could feel the energy rising, because there were so many people who were already doing something, but just not aware of each other. And Lori turned to me after that and she's like, well, I think we have to keep going. And it has now grown so organically over these last 8 months. And it's been beautiful to see how many people around the country want to fight back against this new reality, because I do believe that once we get through these terrifying times, that ultimately we will be, I hope, in a more just, more equitable, a more progressive situation. And I feel like artists are, we're not going to change the world. People will change the world, and we can help inspire people to change the world. And I'm a big believer in that, because you can convey things through art that simply can't be conveyed through a speech or through an article. And it's about using art to transform consciousness. So, with the Federation, we don't feel ownership of it. We've provided the resources for people to take the ball and run with it. There's an Art Action Day toolkit for people to do stuff next week and beyond. Some of the ideas we have are, sing-alongs, big believers in the power of bringing people together and singing, and projecting iconic texts on art and democracy onto the surfaces of buildings, and keeping it going. An idea, and I will end with this, for the long term, and I've been talking to For Freedoms, which is an artist-run super PAC, and we are joining forces, is to create a 50-state listening tour with artist-driven town halls and a curriculum to distribute free to schools all around the country.
Thank you.
That's it.
So we're going to have to, the stories were so important. We're not going to have time for crosstalk. We've got about 12 minutes left, and I want to spend it talking with you and having you talk with us. Are you good with that? Are you guys all right with that? Great. Can we have a round of applause, please? Whoops, no, Siri, I'm not trying to get you. Just trying to get to my questions. So, how did that feel? Yeah, it was personal, as well as talking about our activism. And I think the important thing is that this is the way that I like to do this work. I think it's the most genuine, and it helps us get beyond some barriers. I think you got to know us in a way that you would not have if we were just being talking heads up here. Hey, Lisa Mount, is that you? So we're going to, I want to, by a show of hands, how many of you in the audience are working at the intersection of arts and activism? Yes. By a show of hands, how many of you are interested in doing this work and learning more about it? Yes. Thank you. All right. And how many of you, any of you feeling that you lack agency or power that might help you to move forward if you understood? Yeah. All right. Thank you. This is helpful. So we're going to give you a chance to ask some questions of the panelists. And the way that we're going to do this is I'm going to kind of hold the cue, and we have mics here, here, and here. And you raise your hands. I will call on you. I'm going to try to hold 4 at a time. Krista is going to help me hold the cue. And I'm going to ask if you would make your questions really, really, yes, concise. Thank you. So here's one of the things I have. Are there things that you heard in the stories that we didn't, and because we didn't get to crosstalk, are there things that you heard in the stories that resonated with you that are calling a question or something for you that you want to ask one of the panelists? You have a question. First one. Yes. 2. 3.
Tansei.
Yes.
Ryan Cunningham. My people are the Plains Cree from Central Canada. I would like to thank you, Carol, for doing a land acknowledgement at the beginning of the session as well. And I would like to make an invitation and offer to the panel, which is part of the question, and to everyone in the room, to consider giving a land acknowledgement at your organizations, at your events, and presentations. And if you understand the fear of being wrong, of saying it wrong, and not knowing what is correct, and to invite you to go towards the Lenape Center here in New York to get that language and wordage, and perhaps offer the sponsor of this event, the New York City Media and Entertainment office, to perhaps be a resource for everyone as well and have that language to offer. My question for the panel is how do you get through, or how did you get through the fear of speaking your voice, of speaking where you came from, and I guess were there allies in the room that helped you do that perhaps other allies in this room might want to hear how they can offer that support?
Great question. Thank you. Who wants to take that?
I guess I can. But, like I said, theater was, for me, the way I found community. It was where I was happiest, and I think it's about focusing on those who get you and who have your back and who are your allies, rather than dwelling on those who don't. And I think I learned that from a very young age, being a Sri Lankan immigrant in this country and a minority even in my own country, a Sri Lankan Tamil, is that people often don't think of us as, we kind of fall in between. We're neither black nor white. And it kind of is unpredictable which situation I'm in and what people regard me as. But it was through finding this community of artists that I realized I felt I belonged and could escape the trappings of identity, which is a way that people seek to divide us. And I think just finding those communities and spreading community and spreading love and compassion is really what people can focus on.
That situation that happened at the National Endowment for the Arts meeting, there were 6 arts organizations at that table with me. And I wasn't the only one that was upset, really, really bothered by what was said. But I did write the letter. I had the privilege of working for an organization that was willing to publish the letter. But it was a colleague who became an ally by his action. Because Jesse Rosen at the League of American Orchestras then wrote another letter that said, because the executive director of the National Association for Music Education said, no, what she said happened didn't happen. And so it became my word against his word. And Jesse Rosen then wrote a letter and published it that said, no, what Carol McCord said happened. You become an ally by action. It's what you do. It's making a decision, and you don't always know who your allies are until they show up.
May I just quickly
Yes.
answer that also? So for me, I'm still afraid. I feel like is my answer. Like, so it really was about like going into my fear and staying in that place, and so I just also share that with folks who are open and interested in being allies and accomplices in the work, because we can get scared about the acronym, and I don't know about how the transgender thing works, and it's like, someone said something at the opening plenary about our values, and I feel like our values are worthless unless we act on them, right? And I want to just put in the room, for white people in the room, that us having anti-racist values is meaningless unless we look at the source of racism, which is whiteness and white supremacy. So it's not the same thing, but we can translate it to working with trans folks, that having really wonderful values and being supportive doesn't mean anything unless we start doing the work, which means going into our fear and sometimes making missteps and getting the pronoun wrong, but making active choices and starting the work.
Not being afraid to fail forward. Was it Lisa?
Hey y'all, Lisa Mount, Artistic Logistics, New Orleans and Sawtee, Nacoochee, Georgia. Question that I hope is as concise as possible. What structures and systems within the performing arts industry have helped or hindered your work at the intersection of activism and artistry?
Oh, you went there. You went there. Who wants to take that one?
Well, I'm not going to name this foundation, but I had a meeting with my managing director and my associate with the foundation, and the person who met with us said, well, I'm not convinced that what you're doing can change anything, you know, or can make lasting change. And I was stunned. First of all, it was completely disrespectful. I'm not an amateur. I've been doing this for a very long time. But you just plow forward. You know, you just can't let anything like that stop you. But I think the thing is, and also this, you know, there's a lot we can complain about in the foundation world, frankly. And the thing is that idea that, well, what are you doing new? What are you doing? You know, this is just nonsense, because it's like, one of the things my father said many years ago, which I think is very useful for all of us in this time, is after the election, people were tearing their hair out and crying and carrying on and going, you know, trying to do things. And I thought of what my father said, which was, you can't change things in a minute. The mountain, you cannot move that mountain all at once. You have to do it shovel by shovel by shovel, and you have to look at the long view. And it's not like you don't keep chipping away at it, but that's what you have to do. You have to keep chipping away at it. And this idea that, well, what are you doing that's going to be able to make lasting change is, it's just a ridiculous idea. You know, you have to just work at it, make wrong moves, whatever. You know, just keep plowing forward.
There was a question here.
Yes, my name is Michael Mao from New York. We've been doing inclusive multiculturalism through different programs in addition to, but basic medium is performing. Have you found that it's easier to do activist or transformational performance art, not at a time when we also have to compete with entertainment like APM? Is there a better time to do this kind of performance rather than competing with barbershop quartets, or which a lot of colleges are even booking these days, instead of serious artistic work that make a difference?
And we're counting down to 32 minutes. 32 seconds. 32 seconds. You know, I'm just going to say quickly, we can't compete with that. We can't compete with that. That's not our audience.
That's not the objective.
That's not the objective. It's, the work of activism is to make change. And to understand that it's this, we didn't get into this place overnight. It's going to take generations to undo the damage that has been done over 500 years. And so it is that long view. And I want to say, I'm going to take this last second to say, I think that the challenge that we've got, the struggle of the 21st century, as James and Grace Lee Boggs said, is the struggle to become more human beings. That is the journey that we're on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.
A nice thank you to the panel one more time. And before you all run out of the room, can we get you guys to wait right there for us? Before you folks all run out of the room, we want to say a very, very special thank you and acknowledgement to Laura Colby for making the Ann Carlson piece happen at the beginning of the plenary today. So thank you so much for making that happen. And I am going to quote one of the panelists: "Go out from this place and inspire people to change the world." Have a great conference. We'll see you in the exhibit hall.